the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, Browker practitioners cast a hex on state governments that won't accredit their schools of magic, forgetting that they've actually hidden those schools in pocket universes and nobody can find them. The future of humanity rests on a bevy of Davids. Lest we continue the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we talk with DJ Butler about Witchy Kingdom, the last entry in the Witchy Wars Flintlock Fantasy Adventure Series. It's a great book set in a magically changed North American past, very full of extremely cool 18th and 19th century magical lore, and possessed of a winning, tough-minded heroine who is trying to survive a siege on the seat of empire, Cahokia. Plus, we continue with a complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. Hey, the Baen September contest is coming up, and it's a 2-book giveaway extravaganza. Hey, this is a pretty easy one, too. You don't have to write something funny or insightful. No. You just have to be lucky. And hey, you're listening to this, so we already know you're lucky, right? The Future of Humanity and a Bevy of Davids. This month, we've got 2 new anthologies coming out. The first, Stellaris, People of the Stars, explores what humanity's future might look like once we venture into space and adapt ourselves to that environment. The second, The Chronicles of Davids, collects works from 19 Davids of distinction in the field of science fiction and fantasy, and I think you might know who some of them are. To celebrate these 2 collections this month, we're giving away copies of both signed by their respective editors. To enter to win, simply send an email with your name to contest@baen.com by September 20th. Pretty easy, huh? Find out more at the Baen.com front page or by signing up for our bi-monthly newsletter, which will get you all the news of new releases, contests, and more. You can also do that right there on the left-hand side of the main page at Baen.com. So enter the contest and get the newsletter, then sit back and wait for the manna to rain down. I want to welcome DJ Butler to the podcast. Hello, Dave. How's it going?
Hey, Tony. I'm thrilled to be here. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I understand you're deep in your basement bunker in Utah.
That's correct. In the historic bunker where 7 Habits of Highly Effective People were written, and where now I write fantasy novels, pacing back and forth, thinking deep thoughts.
Very cool, very cool. Well, DJ Butler, Dave, grew up in swamps, deserts, and mountains. After messing around for years with the practice of law, he finally got serious and turned to his lifelong passion of storytelling. He now writes adventure stories for readers of all ages, plays guitar, and spends as much time as he can with his family. He's the author of several books from Wordfire Press and from Baen, Witchy Eye and Witchy Winter. Now at booksellers everywhere is a new entry in that Witchy Wars series. That book is called Witchy Kingdom by DJ Butler. We are, as we began, we're in Cahokia. This is not the Cahokia we know as being in East St. Louis and a state park. Where are we? What's going on? And can you sort of bring us up to date and set the world of Witchy Kingdom?
Yeah, so Cahokia is the chief of the 7 mound builder kingdoms of the Ohio, and as we open, it's under siege. And it has political uncertainty within its walls as well as military threat without. This is the 7 mound builder kingdoms are an ancient alliance of people that came from a lost world, a sunken land in the old world, and in ages past. And as the empire of the New World sort of rose up next to them, they joined it. But they've always been a little bit different, a little bit alien. They've got a separate history and a separate. When this is sort of some of the debate in the book, their own goddess that separates them from the other peoples of the empire. So what's happened is book 3 opens is our our protagonist, Sarah, who grew up thinking she was Sarah Calhoun and learned as a teenager that she's the daughter of Sarah Elysarias, former king of Cahokia, has arrived in book 2, and as book 3 opens, she has made a splash and attracted a lot of following, but she has not yet achieved what she came to accomplish, which is, or at least in part, which is to recover her father's throne. So some of her rivals, former rivals, have lined up with her, others have not. And she learns that she has other internal enemies she didn't know, people who actually see her people's ancient goddess as a demon and a curse. And meanwhile, we've got the besieging armies on the one side of the Emperor Thomas Penn, and on the other side, the ancient king of the Mississippi and Ohio River system, the Heron King, has turned to his wrathful, destructive face of Simon's sword, and the beast kind, the subjects of Simon's sword, are rampaging on the western banks, and so Cahokia and its people are divided within and outside, surrounded as the book opens.
Yeah, and for anybody that you may have just mentioned it, but Cahokia is where East St. Louis is in geographically, but there's no St. Louis. This is a world where magic works. It's America it's a North America that's divided up into sectional area. Explain the world a little bit more, maybe. As far as the magic systems and such.
The part of the original idea for the stories was, when I was first kicking the stories around the plot, I actually thought I might set it in the Holy Roman Empire, and that kind of early modern Brothers Grimm-like setting where you can have, a bishop and a prince and an alderman, right, all interacting, and you have knights who carry guns. And at some point in the creative process, I just transferred that idea to an 1815 alternate America. So it's America. They don't use the name America. The land, the empire is organized as an elective empire. So there's an emperor who happens to be. He doesn't happen to be. He campaigned for it. He got to be the emperor, in part by virtue of his great wealth, which is the Penn landholder Thomas Penn. So, but the powers of various powers of the empire send electors to choose and also to restrain the emperor. So it's got a constitution that's kind of one part U.S. Constitution, one part early modern Germany and Austria. So you've got mostly ethnicities and kind of historical groups that you recognize from reading U.S. history. So you've got people like the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee are part of the empire, and some of the Algonquian peoples send electors. Some of them are outside, some of them are in. And then you've got some straight up fantasy. So then you have people who historically were here, but who are here in the story in a different sort of guise. The Igbo and the Bantu powers of the Gulf Coast area, and then you've got some straight up fantasy people like the Cahokians, who are sort of an analog for elves.
And they call themselves firstborn.
They do. That's a polite way to talk about them, and there are various slurs. They get called snakeborn, or fae, or eldritch, or serpentborn. But firstborn is the polite way, or maybe Ophidians is a reasonably polite way to talk about them, and that's a way to identify them with their goddess, who is many people in the setting use a biblical paradigm to talk about their setting and about their origins. and there's that's true for the Cahokians, for the mound builders as well. What they understand is that their goddess is the first wife of Adam, and that they are descended from her, and that one of the ways she manifests herself in the world, or one of her great symbols, is in serpent form.
Yeah, and that's why the throne of Cahokia is called the Serpent Throne, right? I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there's if you go back and read, as one does, right? As one does, if you go back and read Egyptian hieroglyphs,
as DJ Butler does, yes.
Sure. Many of our listeners, Tony, are Egyptologists. So the goddess Isis. Okay, the hieroglyphs that are used to write the name of the goddess Isis include a stylized picture of a throne. And the goddess Isis is understood to be equivalent to the throne of the pharaoh. And so yes, the serpent throne depicted on the cover of book 3, and no one ever says this in any of the books, so I'm not just giving away a spoiler here, I'm giving away secret interpretive keys. The throne is the goddess, is the person who is sitting on it, right? These are symbols that are not rationally dissectable. They're equivalents in myth language. So yes, that's why the throne is a big 7-headed serpent.
The maps are clearly maps of America in the book, and we're not exactly spoiling too much by giving a little bit of background here. So, and it's just damn cool. So I want to talk about it. So and the religions there's Christianity, but there's also, there's paganism. There's a lot of sort of alchemist sort of things, like the Masonic stuff is real and works, and stuff like that. And there's all kind of this sort of feeling of 19th century mysticism that or even before, that you've just imbued everything with.
Yeah, I've tried to. This is like a soapbox I get up on a lot. One day it will get me into trouble, but I think that fantasy literature the last 20 years or so has made two big mistakes, two big bad moves, and I think one of them is grimdark, because that's just sophomoric nihilist nonsense. Silly people saying, "Well, there is no God, there's no meaning in life. You want to get laid, right?" That's grimdark. And then but the other is so-called magic systems. Every young fantasy writer you talk to thinks they have to design a magic system, and they call them hard magic systems, and they're complete and utter nonsense. They don't resonate because they don't look or behave like people have thought magic behaves in the real world. They're based on, you take some artificial some object that's that's multivalent, that has a few aspects, like say the color spectrum. You go, okay, there are 7 colors. Okay, there are 7 kinds of magic. If I'm touching color X, I can do Y thing, and it's complete balderdash. And it makes a mockery of the roots of fantasy, which are deeply Jungian and spiritual. And fantasy is in its root the what-if literature of the human soul. And I think that a lot of its power comes from the fact that fairy tale magic and real world magic are not systematic, but they're archetypal, and they touch the human consciousness. And so when you get rid of that stuff, you're just writing adventure stories in which people, if they consume one metal, can fly, but if they consume a different one, they can shoot fire out their eyes, right? It's nonsense. So Witchy doesn't do that. Instead, I tried very hard there are some characters who practice magic on a kind of a theoretical level, sort of Fraserian concepts of similarity and contagion, but most of them don't. Most magic is practiced in paradigms that are as close to real world as I can get them. So they are voodoo Hungans, or they are German Braukers, or they are, or they use. And I've assigned this to Memphis. I call this Memphite magic, but it's really sort of Hellenistic spell books, Greco-Roman, Neoplatonic kind of magic. And along with that, I've got absolutely sort of a lot of kind of Masonic stuff. I mean, 1815, the real world was like the height of the Masonic craze, right? All the founders were Masons, all the early presidents, everybody was a Mason. I am not a Mason, if you were wondering. So that's a line that runs through that is important to the story sometimes and culturally, but also it connects to the magical practice of some of the characters. And similar, so that's the magic side. And the religion side, similarly, I've tried to have real world, because really it's the same point. Magic, religion here, they're very close, and I've tried to have real world religion. And so you've got Christians, including this is a setting in which the Pope, the Borgia Pope, turned Turk, and centuries in the past. So one consequence of that is that there is no Catholicism. There is also no Protestant Reformation. You have a sort of a conciliar model for Christianity, like you would find it if you go read like Geoffrey of Monmouth or the Venerable Bede. They're not asking the Pope for everything. They discuss. The bishops get together and they try and figure out what should we do. But there is a Protestant-like movement, a new light Christianity, and there are new light characters, and there are characters who are voodoo, and even the Cahokian religion, which is obviously made up, is deeply rooted as deeply as I can in things like ancient Egypt and biblical texts to try to make it feel like it's real, like this is the kind of thing a human society might do, like this would have meaning for people if they were doing it, rather than just, I am Trogdor, Lord of Dwarves, and if you touch stone, you will be stronger. Yeah. So I love writing this stuff. And it's been great that it finds readers.
Yeah, and out in the West, there are these magical beings that are beast people. They're kind of, and they have their own systems and cultures and religions that sort of feels very much Jungian tarot kind of feel to the way that it's bird-headed men and fox people and things like that. And it's got some Arthurian myth, it seems like, and there are some Middle Ages kind of stuff with Heron King and Peter Plowshare.
Yeah. Part of the root of the story. One of the things one of the ingredients I sort of layered in at the very beginning when I was trying to figure out what I was writing was, I think it was a National Geographic article, and I was reading about the waterways of the U.S., and there's a map. And I looked at it, and I realized for the first time, what's probably someone told me this in like ninth grade geography, and I forgot or never sort of thought about what that really meant. But most of the continental United States, basically from the Rocky Mountains over to the Appalachians, is one giant drainage bowl. It's really one river system, the whole thing, and it's an enormous, one of the biggest rivers in the world. Might be the biggest, I don't know. Really, the Ohio and the Mississippi River are one giant river. And they empty most of the continent. And as I was looking at that, I thought, well, what kind of... I think I was reading Egyptian stuff at the time and about the Nile and the different gods of the Nile. And I thought, if this river had a god, what would the god look like? And so Simon Sword and Peter Plowshare, and the name is, again, this is the name that the people descended from Europeans who were part of the empires, people who use a Christian paradigm, a biblical paradigm to talk about things. This is the name they've applied, right? So you've got sort of Simon Peter and sword plowshare kind of dualism there. But it's a father-son dyad like Horus Osiris, except they replace each other in succession. It's the same being living through a series of fathers and sons, and Peter Plowshare presides over great periods of benevolence. It's Peter Plowshare whose magics prevent the diseases of the European immigrants from killing all of the people who preceded them. So we don't have that big die-off in the Witchy War stories, and so we have a lot more Shawnee and Fox and Comanche and Algonquin and stuff around. It's his magics that, or it's his lore that taught people to the Three Sisters agriculture, beans and corns and squash, and right. So it's a great sort of benevolent figure giving to all those who come to his immense valley. But then the son, Simon Sword, is violent, vengeful, a destroyer, and a bringer of cosmic change. And so his land is this ambiguous place that is both fertile, but also produces monsters and abominations. And that's one thing you see in the beast kind, who are sort of semi-human or humanish, but they have beast parts, and they're clearly capable of elevation because some of them do rise, but many of them are just savage and bestial and berserkers. And there's one of the sort of notes that Book 3 ends on is Sarah's uncertainty about her own goddesses and her own people's connection with this very fertile but also sort of grotesque and dangerous kind of Eden.
Yeah. Well, some of them are on Sarah's side.
Yeah. From the end of book one, right? So
Cahokia.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so from the end of book one, one of the spoilers left, right, and center here. Book one. One of the elements that comes out of the resolution of the climax there is the troop of beast kind who have come hunting her with their master Simon Sword are sworn over or bonded magically to her as her loyal bodyguard troop. So she travels this sort of strange, bone-thin Appalachian waif with mismatched eyes, wearing an oversized army coat with this troop of 50, and they're not uniform. It's not 50 minotaurs. It's a woman with a cow's head, but then it's a guy with 3 legs, and they're all captured legs, and it's a guy with with scorpion claws or whatever. It's chaotic, so she makes quite an impression. So there's that troop that's on Sarah's side, and there are others who we meet initially as wild animals, but who various ways sort of become more people, rise above just being merely animal.
Yeah, and a lot of that's because of just encountering Sarah, who's a force in this world. So tell us about Sarah a little bit. She's our main character. There's a lot of characters in this book, Dave, but she's pretty much the center of things. She's a girl from the Appalachians, and she's got a cussed personality. Tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah,
she's very strong.
Yeah, it's I was not trying to write a so-called strong female character. I think most of the characters I write on some level are a version of me, and I think Sarah is a version of me, a kind of version of me. So she, as book one opens, Sarah is believes herself to be the illegitimate daughter of the Calhoun family elector. So one of the a military veteran, a hero, kind of a man much feared for his military exploits in the neighborhood. Neighborhood being Nashville, And she learns that that's not really the whole story. The day that she takes the clan down to sell the family tobacco crop at the fair, and Imperial Army officers try to kidnap her. And in the course of this, she discovers that she is the secret daughter of the dead empress and of the strange military hero, magician, king of Cahokia, Sarah Elysarias and Hannah Penn, the empress, and that she's been hidden from birth, and that she has siblings, and that her uncle, the Emperor Thomas, has just discovered her existence, and in the course of torturing her mother to death, actually, and sees her as a threat to his wealth and power and wants to have her killed. So Sarah, in terms of personality, is smart, just smart as hell, and she is paranoid, and she's xenophobic, and she grows up as sort of the older sister figure to the young her generation in the clan, in a very clannish society. She's charismatic. She's decisive. She's a natural leader. She's also deeply loyal to those who she sees as her own. And she's grown up thinking of herself as as the elector's daughter and as a natural hexer. And then as her past sort of starts to break open and become revealed to her, she sets out on her journey, which is to recover her father's throne and to find and rescue her two siblings. And part of that journey for her also involves learning more about her mother and father, and it also involves becoming master of her talents, which turns out to mean she's better than just a hexer, someone who says, certain nursery rhymes and throws in an egg yolk and some cat hair and can accomplish some effects, or can put stump water on your wart. She has way more talent than that, so she's developing into a pretty powerful magician along the way, as well as having an unusual, a natural gift as a seer. So the picture, Dan Dos Santos is a genius. His stuff is amazing. He likes to draw Sarah with like red shooting out her eye, which is great, which shows people that there's something about her eye. It's not a literal representation of what happens in the book. She doesn't shoot beams at her eye. She has gifts of vision, and her gift comes from ultimately her conception, which is magical, which is abnormal. Her father, when killed, when dying, took 3 acorns and dipped them in his own blood and sent them with his loyal servants back to his wife. She ate the acorns and conceived 3 children, all of whom had distinctive appearances. And Sarah had an eye that would never open, and it's a blight. You meet her in the first page of book 1, and she's homeless. She stays homely, by the way. This is not trick homeliness, where in fact everyone is in love with her. Sarah is physically unattractive, and but at the beginning, her eye is swollen shut and leaking pus and sort of, red and inflamed and horrifying. At a certain point, we're giving away spoilers. So in about a third of the way into book 1, she's in a physical fight. She gets knocked on the head, and an object is knocked out of that eye socket, and it turns out to be an acorn. And it's the acorn. It's the acorn. That emergence of the acorn, the removal of that acorn, opening that eye, reveals that eye has gifts of vision, gifts of sight. She sees people's auras. She's very talented at magics that allow her to see great distances.
Yeah, she can tell if people are telling fibs too pretty well.
Can't lie to Sarah. You can't hide your emotions from Sarah. Yeah, so it's pretty good. It's a pretty good gift.
Yeah, and that's why we call the first book Witchy Eye.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, Yeah, so really the arc. I was having a really good conversation with somebody about these stories just the other day, and sort of the arc of Sarah in those 3 books as she goes from being kind of, Hellcat to Queen is sort of the arc of the first 3, and along the way, many other things.
Yeah, and she kind of stays a Hellcat and evolves into a Queen. Which is the fun of the book, is that at any moment the old Sarah can come back, and I love it when she tells the eunuch that if he doesn't behave himself, she's going to make his balls grow back. That's a wonderful scene. He doesn't want that.
Yeah, I like that too.
There's a lot of situational humor in the books that really that you have, that knowing and feeling the magic makes the humor work as well, and such. So Sarah's in Cahokia. Cahokia at the end of Witchy Winter, she's surrounded the thing with this wall. But she is under siege by these bad guys, and they are basically, it's the Ohio company, but they're under the control of her uncle, Thomas Penn, back in Philadelphia, who's very, very evil.
Yeah.
Talk about the bad guys a little bit, and the necromancer that shows up, and et cetera.
Yeah. So there are several kinds of forces there are lots of forces that are arrayed against her, right, at various levels. If we sort of skip over some of the people who are merely rivals and who even eventually may become allies, your sort of 2 great poles of opposition to her are in the East and in the West. And in the West, I've already talked about Simon's sword, and ultimately sort of the long arc of the story is going to have to be about dealing with Simon's sword and transitioning back to a peaceful manifestation to Peter Plowshare. In the East, though, what you've got is her uncle, and her uncle is corrupted and doesn't know it. He wants to accomplish good things, and we see benevolent sides of him. He wants to care for people. In fact, really, on some level, what he's sort of a frustrated Superman. He sees himself as the person who can and should solve problems, and he's angry when the electors won't cooperate, and he's angry when his father chooses his sister rather than him to be the landholder, and then she gets elected as the empress. And in that anger and that pride, he's been corrupted by an older force, which is the necromancer Oliver Cromwell. And so Cromwell in the real world, Cromwell's an important figure, and we tend to think about him and talk about him in history in terms of being a small d Democrat or a small r Republican. In other words, he's somebody who expanded the franchise and moved us. Magna Carta, it was his first step, and now we have this with this the interregnum, and this moves us closer towards modern, parliamentary democracy, and that's a way to see him. But if you think about Oliver Cromwell in terms of the Stuart dynasty's ideology of the divine right of kings, that is to say, the king this is really kind of an old Davidic monarchy kind of idea. The king is God's representative. He's the closest thing you're going to get to God on earth. It's not the priest, it's the king. And the king's right is sacred. It's not a matter of private property rights. God has made him king. And in that light, then Oliver Cromwell becomes something very different, right? He becomes a cosmic figure. He becomes somebody who's willing to raise his hand against God's anointed and strike him down. And that's the Oliver Cromwell of these stories. And it's someone who Cromwell is dissatisfied with what he sees as God's plan. Specifically, he's dissatisfied with death, and his goal is to strike down death and form an undying republic of all humankind. And Cromwell in the 1600s creates a republic, an eternal republic of Britain. He's got with armies of undead and also armies of constructs. I like historical jokes, and he has a new model army, which in the real world meant an army on a new model. But in the Witchy setting, he has big golems, new models who are fighting for him. So he's defeated in the setting by John Churchill, who in the real world was the first Duke of Marlborough, who's the great antagonist, the leader of the Allied armies against the Sun King Louis XIV, and Winston Churchill's grandfather by about, I want to say, 13 or 14 generations. So in the books, he defeats Cromwell and then comes to the throne as lucky King John II, because of course there's only ever been one King John in England. There have been Henrys and there have been Georges in large numbers and multiple Richards. One King John, because the first was regarded as being so blighted that it was unlucky to name a King John thereafter. So in this setting, John Churchill reverses that sort of curse. He's lucky King John, and he does so in a big act of a nationwide act of apotropaic magic, defensive magic, which is he unbaptizes everybody, converts everyone back to paganism, which stops Cromwell from using baptismal rolls to kill them. So England is this sort of neo-pagan, kind of reconstructed paganism in the setting. Cromwell is defeated in the 17th century, never goes away, sticks his head back up in the 18th. The 45 uprising is in this setting is Cromwellian. It's not the Stuart family trying to come back on its own. It is Cromwell that is moving them. But he or a part of him have moved to the New World. And one of the things we see in Book 3 is that he's done so really along with William Penn. And so the Penn family and their great landholding have had this corruption within them from the beginning. And Cromwell's interest in Sarah, as he wants to end death. He wants to bring about immortality for all humans. And it's going to require enormous sacrifice to do so. And what he wants to do is kill all of Sarah's people. And really, what he wants to do is kill their goddess and use the energy that is within them to fuel this act of sort of sorcerous engineering to bring about the end of death. So Sarah's uncle is manipulated by him from the very beginning, and therefore all of his wealth and his political power turns to trying to crush her, trying to round up all of the firstborn, and ultimately trying to kill them.
Yeah, and Sarah is sore beset during Witchy Kingdom by these forces that have his name Robert Hooke, who is sort of who's the keeper of the Cromwell spirit at the moment, I guess you could. Yeah, Cromwell's kind of an evil spirit that jumps around from person to person in this sense. I guess he's not really embodied in his own body.
Yeah, he becomes embodied. One of the fun. So at a certain point, the emperor uses to communicate with his. So the director, you made a good clarifying point earlier. The imperial army is not really into play yet because the emperor's ability to raise and fund armies, his hands are tied by the electors, and so he's in the process of using the crises generated by Simon's sword as well as fake crises, non-real fake news. I was writing about fake news back in like 2010 when I wrote the story. See, ginned up crises to cause the electors to allow him to raise taxes to raise an army. But in the meantime, he's doing everything he can, and so he's also the shareholder, the owner of the Imperial Ohio Company, which has itself a lot of wealth, and he's using that wealth and freeing men from prison and doing things to send these sort of militias to besiege Sarah. We start to see the real army proper in the form of artillery in Book 3, but mostly we're still dealing with kind of his irregulars as he's marshaling other kinds of forces.
Yeah. I love the name of the leader of the Imperial Ohio Company, which is notwithstanding Schmidt, who's a woman. She's great.
Yeah. So what was the name? So I was reading about Puritan naming patterns, and it was a very common practice. You get all these Puritan names like Faith and Hope and Charity, right? You still have people who have those kinds of names, but 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you had even more colorful ones like Armor of God or Trust in God, right? Well, sometimes
or Capability Brown,
yeah, very good. Some people chose these deliberately to communicate to their children. Sometimes people wanted to give their child a biblical name and didn't know what to do. They couldn't think of one or couldn't decide one, and so they would literally flip open their Bible and put a finger down, and that's the word, right? This is a very old, extremely simple way to cast lots. It's just point at verses in the Bible and then try to interpret them. And so I can't remember what I was reading, but there was a real world, I think 17th century Puritan in Massachusetts, whose name, I think I'm getting this right, was Absolutely Johnson. And that's the reason why, because his parents had flipped open the Bible and they put their finger on the word absolutely. So I said, this is great. What other crazy names could you land on?
She and Thomas communicates with her. Tell us about these very creepy partlet quintuplets. That's one of the... Yeah,
so I was very good. So I almost walked down this road a minute ago because you were talking about Cromwell's embodiment. Cromwell is not physically on the scene. He appears as a vision first. He's gaining power, but at the beginning of the story, he's not physical and only rarely shows up in vision. But in Book 3, he takes bodies, and the reason is that so Thomas, and he has his director of the Imperial Ohio Companies, a woman named Notwithstanding Schmidt. And to communicate in real time, there's this set of quintuplets who the Imperial College of Magic at Philadelphia sends to Thomas, because the children were identified at birth as having a shared soul, as being connected, and so the colleges raise them. So they become a kind of like a telephone, because what they see at one end, they mimic out the other end, and so you put some of them in Philadelphia and some of them out in Cahokia, and they can pass on messages. So the way it works from Schmidt's point of view is, she's got these three sort of young teenage boys, and they speak in unison, and they're imitating whoever their other siblings are seeing on the other end, so do kind of impersonations of the voices, and it does not go well for the partlet quintuplets. So one of them, well, ultimately two, we're giving spoilers, have their bodies occupied by Cromwell. So Cromwell, this is what Hook does, is bring Cromwell into a physical body in an attempt for by Hook and Cromwell to enter the sanctuary in Cahokia and kill kill the goddess. So he gains a body, and then when that body is destroyed, he moves into one of the other partlets. It was a lot of fun writing those guys.
Yeah, and they all look alike, and they talk in unison, and they just seem like something that stepped out of a horror movie. So, they're and they get and when one of them gets possessed or or something, the other one's it's a terrible thing. Children in danger and children being used in horrific ways, but it's very effective as a scary thing in the book. Um, we should probably talk a little bit about New Orleans and what's going on on the southern end of things, because that's going to determine Cahokia's fate as well, and Sarah's.
Yeah, one of my favorite scenes is I have a lot of favorite scenes. You know, if a book gives me sort of 5 or 6 good scenes where I feel like, oh yeah, then I feel like, okay, this book justified its existence. And New Orleans, that story builds up to one of those scenes. So in New Orleans, you know, what's happened in book 1 is the Chevalier, or the Chevalier if you're French, who is one of the 2 electors of Louisiana, he's the secular, he's the knight, he's the nobleman who runs the city, and he in book 1 he orders the killing of the city's bishop, and the bishop is a genuinely he's the most unambiguously saintly person in the whole story all the way through. He's the genuinely good man, and the Chevalier killed him. And he has 2 sons. He not the Chevalier. The bishop has 2 sons, and so the story follows. Then in books 2 and 3 follows the 2 sons. And what happens in book 2, which has to happen. This is necessary. This is a good story logic. Is of those 2 sons, the one who becomes bishop and replaces his father is the bad son. And Etienne Uku is one of my favorite characters. He's a gangster, and he can be really ruthless. And there are scenes in book 3 that remind us that he can he's not a nice guy. But he's also a voodoo hungan, and he gets himself made bishop. And the reason he does is because when she was dying, when his mother was on her deathbed, he swore to her that he would take care of his father. And so he's been a kind of, as this saintly man has been making his way around New Orleans, his son has been sort of shadowing him and taking care of him a little bit. And now that he's dead, Etienne is hell-bent on revenge. So in book 3, so what's happened is there's a struggle between Etienne, the Chevalier. Etienne basically encourages and tax revolts, people to stop paying money. The Chevalier has the kind of classic problem of landed nobility, which is a lot of land, a lot of theoretical wealth, but no cash flow. There's several people have this problem in these stories. And when Etienne cuts off his sources of cash, ultimately and then also encourages an actual military revolt among some of the now unpaid gendarmerie, the Chevalier turns to Spain. And so the climactic sequence, Spain meaning New Spain, Mexico City, and some of the climactic sequence in book 3 is when the Chevalier, having abandoned his palace, this is the required sign of commitment from him by the Spanish. You got to march. We're going to send armies to you, but you're going to march with us. You got to come out and join the armies, or we're not doing this. And so he leaves New Orleans to ride in at the head of these armies, and Etienne meets him at the bridge, at Bishop's Bridge over the Mississippi River to stop him. And this is one of my favorite scenes. I've been planting some of these seeds from early on. You hear references to basilisks in book 1 without ever seeing them. There's a joke about eating basilisk étouffée. And in book 2, you kind of, you worry about them when you're in the mud, but you never see them. And then in the climax, Etienne is connected with Sarah. And it's through her power of vision and along the ley line of the Mississippi River. She needs his help. She's trying to puzzle. She doesn't understand it. And she's under siege hook within the sanctuary of the goddess connects with Etienne, and she owes him, and she repays the favor by causing the basilisks of the lower Mississippi to rise. This is my favorite scene. Is the result of this kind of interaction, this bargain, is then as Etienne is standing alone on the bridge facing this immense Spanish army, flying serpents come over the bridge, like out of the Book of Numbers, and are stinging these, Aztec berserkers and Japanese mercenaries and everyone else in this big motley Spanish army, and he holds the bridge by virtue of Sarah repaying his debt to him, right, and by the rising of the basilisks. There's spoilers. I spoiled all 3 books right there. That's all the way to book 3.
Well, that is it's cool. But I mean, the whole point of Witchy Kingdom is that Sarah's under siege and she has to get help, and she has to figure out herself how to connect with this goddess to fight off because Cromwell's eternity is an eternity that would be hellish, the zombie world, right? I mean, it's not going to be a nice place, so we don't want that. He's Sauron, so.
That's exactly right. There are competing models here of eternal life. So in Egyptian, there are actually 2 ways to say forever. Okay, we'll get back to hieroglyphics again. This is we're having like a Egyptology discussion. There are 2 ways to say forever in Egyptian, classical Egyptian, not Egyptian Arabic, and they usually go together. And they're often translated. They used to be translated forever and ever in the old translations, and now they're usually translated enduringly and repeatedly. But the words are jet and neche, and one means something that never ends, and the other means something that comes back over and over and over and over again. And so this is one way to think about the sort of competing visions of forever. As Cromwell is sort of in a way, he's kind of an American. He's really obsessed. He wants to hold on to the status quo, right? Forever means not dying. We must not die. Eternal youth. Whereas the life power of the goddess is cyclical. It's all about going and coming again, and things that reappear in different manifestations and never truly die, but always necessarily die for a time. And so that's sort of, without like lecturing on it, that's one of the sort of underlying things going on in the stories.
One of the things that I just wanted to bring in, and maybe have you talk about a little, is Sarah's really cool magical object that she gets, which is the heron plow. And I love that it like digs into the mound and comes out the side. And what is this thing, and what is it? What's it there for? Where'd it come from?
Yeah. So each side of the Heron King has an artifact. So there is a plow and there's a sword. And part of the compact that Sarah's ancestors had made with Simon, with Peter Plowshare, was that they were holding the sword, because holding the sword would limit the power of Simon's sword when he came again. And one of the things that Sarah does to solve her problem at book 1 is give Simon's sword the sword. And she knows it's a bad idea, but she doesn't have a choice. It's her best move. But that empowers him. But in return, she does get the plow, which she has no use for. He doesn't care for it. So what is it? Well, we see it. It's fundamentally, now it does. She gets it to do other little fun things. But fundamentally, it is the power of ordering space. It's the power of creating an ordered cosmos in an object. So there's a line in the middle of book 2 or so where they're talking about, what is Eden and all the crazy things people have thought Eden was or wasn't. And one character says, some people even think that Eden is wherever is wherever the land is plowed. So, and this, back to the ancient Romans, when they created a sanctuary, they plowed it. The first thing you do is you plow a square around it. So her first real use of it is that she restores the tree wall to life. And you said this earlier, Cahokia is ringed by a wall of giant trees. When Sarah sees them, they are dead. They're clearly not meant to be dead. She can see lines of like a spiral writing on them in energy that are invisible to others. And the tree has been killed. Something is wrong. And so one of the things that happens at the climax of books 2 is she uses the plow first to create a connection with the goddess on a particular site, and then she uses the plow to restore the wall of Cahokia. And we were talking about beast kind and sort of how some of the beast kind become, some of them never rise above being animals and they die wild rabid animals. Some of them do. And one of the ways that some of them seem to is, in the climax of book 2, is as Cahokia is being invaded from the west. I mean, invaded is a fancy word. There's a pack of wild half man, half animal things overrunning it from the west side. She, with the help of the goddess, pushes the plow around through the tree wall. And encircling the city, first of all, it revivifies the tree wall, which saves the city from the siege at that moment. But the other thing that it does is that the beast kind who are standing within it cease to rampage. They become calm. They're restored to mental order and sort of wander away, sheepish or unsure of what they were doing or why they were here. So. She does other stuff with it too, sort of on a similar level. When her brother Nathaniel is being crushed by Robert Hooke, has this spell that grinds up people's souls. It's a smaller, portable version of what Cromwell wants to do to the goddess and Sarah's people. It's a sort of vortex that sucks in people's souls and destroys them. And her brother Nathaniel is being sucked into it, and she sends the plow through space, through the two halves of a broken writing tablet, and then encircles Nathaniel, and the plow restores order around him and snaps him out of the vortex. So it's a lot of fun thinking about kind of what. Magic swords is such a much more common kind of artifact in a fantasy story. It's a lot of fun thinking about, well, what does a magic plow do? But I think that it's a pretty doggone useful thing for a queen.
Yeah, it's very cool. And finally, I guess a lot of the story revolves around the people that are Sarah's allies trying to figure out that they like her and that she's not really their enemy and the people like Alsbieta, Maltris Corin, Bill Lee, who's a great character. He's sort of a gentleman, right? English gentleman. Tell us about some of them, and Tarami, who walks around on his knees at the beginning of the book, at least.
Yeah. So from book 2, so Bill of all of those comes quickly to trust Sarah because he was the head of her father's personal bodyguard, and he was one of the 3 people who took the 3 siblings when they were born and hid them. He hid her brother Nathaniel, but the others are all characters who initially opposed her and sort of come around. Alsbieta in the first place is a cousin, and Alsbieta wants to be queen. And in fact, we meet her initially, and she's lying in ambush for Sarah to try and she believes Sarah has found the Cahokian regalia, which is true, and she wants to lie in ambush and take it from her. So Sarah ultimately brings her around by various kinds of acts of generosity on Sarah's part, or voluntary risk-taking or exposure on Sarah's part. Maltris Corinne is he's the regent. He's running the city. He does not want to. Repeatedly, he says, "I want to go home to my blackberries, and I'm not interested in being here," which actually makes him just exactly the right guy to be running the city. You don't want the guy who this is exactly his aspiration, is to have all the power. He does not want it. He's a good man, but as a good man, he's trying his best to sort out the competing powers in the city, and they're trying to get their goddess to respond and choose a new king. The throne's been vacant. They need someone to really be the leader. And Sarah comes in as an interloper, so his responses initially are all defensive and against Sarah. In fact, arresting her at one point. And the thing that ultimately turns those characters around is their experience together with Sarah, and seeing that Sarah is able to contact the goddess, and whether it's fate or circumstance or whatever, the goddess responds positively and chooses Sarah as her beloved. So there's a lot of biblical language in here. Sarah is chosen as the beloved of the goddess, and those who were sincere in trying to do what they thought the goddess wanted, while yes, at the same time satisfying personal ambition, some of those turn. One of the other characters you mentioned is a fun one, Zadok Tarami. Yeah, so he again is deeply sincere, but he also thinks that Sarah is doing something deeply wicked. And we see him at the very beginning of book 3, and he is returned from a long pilgrimage on his knees. He's walked 700 miles on his knees, all the way across the Ohio, following it's a pilgrim trail, a known, defined pilgrim trail, which is understood to retrace the steps of the prophet king who brought the people here thousands of years ago in the first place, when their land in the old world sank beneath the waves. And so he's been in a pilgrimage seeking advice, not from the goddess, because he actually regards her as a demon and a curse, and he's the foremost voice in this book for the view that this is not a goddess at all; it is an evil power, but from God. He's a Christian cleric, and he is a thorn in Sarah's side. And one of the things that happens is so Maltris Corinne is one of the senior Freemasons of the city, in a lodge that is unique to the firstborn, and we see that a couple times. But where that really becomes sort of important is as people as heroes are dying to defend the city, there is a fight over how to bury them, and it's sort of it's the emblem of the religious conflict that's going on, where there's some people are some fairly traditional Christians, and some people have the religion of their people, historically, which is this goddess, and they're at odds within. And so Maltris Corinne, who is the regent, or who after Sarah sort of begins to take command, he really acts as her vizier, kind of right-hand man or administrator. He's the one who mediates this, and he does it by basically creating a state liturgy, by using his Freemasonry as a non-denominational alternative, right? But we're going to bury these people, and we're going to do it this way, and I'll invite both sides to come. You can both participate in this, but it's my right, and this is going to be the end of it. We're not going to fight. And so, it's a little. That's part of Tarami. So, that's sort of one of the subplots is resolving this religious conflict. And then for Tarami in particular, it resolves by his being witness to miraculous events, and then in the joint defense of the city, where he has to decide whose side is he really on, and come to the defense of people whom he has regarded as pagan and deluded. So a lot of the sort of theme there is kind of joint enterprise, and joint danger and joint undertaking is a way for these characters often to find their way past their differences to be able to cooperate.
Yeah, and there's one character that sort of is. You can take a step back whenever he's on deck, which is Lumen, the hedge wizard. And he's sort of watching it and trying to figure everything out from a non-partisan perspective, as it were. And he eventually becomes an ally, but at first he doesn't know what's going on exactly.
Yeah, Lumen's story is all about, it's really all about his personal kind of quest. And we hear more about his youth in book 3. And he's basically thrown off the family farm. He was never robust enough to be a good farmer. He was sent to go study with the schoolmaster, discovered the schoolmaster was also a rodsman, knew how to douse for water and stuff, learned that instead of whatever he was supposed to learn, and his dad threw him out. And so Lumen is as we meet in the beginning, is a man without a place, and what he really, really wants is a place, and he understands that in terms of an initiation, of being an insider, of being at the center, and that has made him a thief of magic and a thief of traditions, and he's gone around sort of learning arts by sometimes being trained, but sometimes by stealing them. There's a story of a backstory in book 1 where he talks about he finds a blind German Braucher, a German magician. He wants to learn his magic, but the guy will only his tradition. The guy says no. He says, in my tradition, I only teach my own family, and by the way, we alternate sexes, so I'm going to teach a woman relative. And so Lumen goes and hires his niece, who is not at all interested in this, to sit there and listen to lessons from her blind uncle while Lumen takes notes quietly in the corner. So he's all about stealing information, stealing his presence, stealing his way into places and knowledge that that are not opened to him. And so his kind of moment of decision at the end of book 3 is really all about him maybe having an opportunity to steal his way into the most centered place, the greatest knowledge of his life, and then acknowledging that he has not been invited and stepping away. But yeah, in the process of all of that, he goes from being a company magician to being someone who is on Sarah's side.
And he's very empirical too, which I like about. He's really the character that's most like us modern folk in his way, I would say. And he's a lens we can interpret all this through when we get a little bit into the weeds with the arcana showing up and doing stuff. The book is Witchy Kingdom by DJ Butler. It's now at booksellers everywhere, and it is the sequel to Witchy Eye and Witchy Winter. It's part of the Witchy Wars saga. Dave, thanks so much for being with us once again.
Thanks very much for having me, Tony. I appreciate it.
Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Chapter 36. You know, a warrior like you could make a lot of money, Risalda, Gutch told Jagdish one afternoon. With the folks I know, and the things they get into, they're always looking for somebody handy with a blade. People are willing to pay good notes for magic bits off the Inquisition's books, but such a trade tends to attract shifty types. A right honourable fellow like you, who's solid in a fight, could command a decent wage. Jagdish had mostly ignored the big worker over their long journey, but Gutch rarely shut up. Lots of honourable fellows in the criminal smuggling underworld, then? We're lousy with them. Gutch had a loud bark of a laugh. The first few times he'd done it, the noise had startled his horse so badly it had nearly bucked him off. But after several days, his poor bedraggled mount had either gotten used to it or gone deaf. Keep in mind, honour is a relative term, Risalda. No, it isn't, Jagdish said. They were approaching another fork in the road. One path would take them toward Thau, the other toward Sarnabat. Assuming that Gutch hadn't been lying to him the whole time, and Gruvidal had been moving south. It wasn't like following a trail, as they weren't on the same path, but more like following a compass with a twitchy needle. Which way now? Gutch got off his horse, walked to the middle of the road and spread his arms, slowly turning. Jagdish figured that whole twirling bit was for show, and Gutch looked like a fool for nothing. He had originally started doing that as an excuse to get Jagdish to remove his manacles and chains. After having to stop and reorient himself several times a day, Jagdish had just given up and started leaving the chains off while they travelled. It was probably just a matter of time before the prisoner tried to escape. Jagdish tried to prod him into getting the show over with. Surely you can't be the only person in Lock with the gift of tracking magic. Perhaps you could refer me to one who works quicker. My talent is extremely rare. If it were a common gift, I wouldn't have been given absurdly heavy bags of notes to help illegal magic smugglers gather the stuff. There are always dead demon bits washed up on shore, or old fragments of black steel to be found. There's quite a good trade in such things that are off paper for those who want to use magic without the Inquisition sticking their masks in your business. I tell you, it was enough money to tempt even a brilliant artist such as myself from honest labour into terrible criminal misdeeds. Now please, Risalda, I'm trying to concentrate. After a few minutes of spinning about and humming, Gutch began to speak. I can feel it. The magic calls to me. The terrible black steel craft alters the very fabric of the world around it. Gutch put one meaty hand on his forehead and grimaced. But Jagdish the warrior would never know this without the faithful service of humble Gutch, that mighty Angruvidal is... Gutch stopped spinning and pointed. That direction. He opened his eyes, found the sun, and confirmed it. South. At least he was consistent. Thou, then. Jagdish was beginning to suspect that his prisoner was full of fish. But at least he hadn't pointed them toward Sonabad. Because of the recent raids back and forth, if they discovered Jagdish was from Vidal, he'd likely be taken hostage. Then he'd get to experience prison life from both sides, only nobody in Vidal would pay a ransom to have Jagdish returned. You'd better not be putting me on. The big man climbed back on his horse. Of course not, Risalda. You have my solemn word as a forge master. Well, temporarily retired forge master at least, that I'd never lead you astray. I'll run off when I'm not looking, and murder me in my sleep, Jagdish mused. But Gutch hadn't fled yet. The big man talked non-stop the rest of the day as they rode through the forest, but Jagdish couldn't shake the feeling that he was going to try something. So a few hours later, when they'd stopped to camp for the night, Jagdish locked the manacles onto Gutch's wrists and looped the chain around a stout tree. This is hardly a comfortable position to sleep. If I don't get enough rest, it might affect my tracking ability tomorrow. If my keen magical senses are worn out, I might accidentally lead us astray, Risalda. We could lose Angruvidal. Uh-huh, Jagdish said, as he put together their campfire. What if I need to piss? Hold it until morning. What if, in the middle of the night, we get attacked by wolves or bandits? Try not to wake me. Oh. Gutch leaned against his tree. Bark makes a terrible pillow. Jagdish got a strong fire going. They'd been climbing all day, and nights were cold in the foothills. Satisfied that it wasn't going to go out, Jagdish began preparing their food. Thankfully, Gutch was silent for a few minutes while he did it. Once he had the kettle on, Jagdish took out his pocket watch and wound the spring. The marvellous little thing was still working, long after its previous owner had been murdered by wizards. He felt it whir and tick in his hand, and regretted not leaving it with Pakpa. He missed her already. It was an embarrassment for a bride to have to go back to her parents' house. But his name had collected so many embarrassments at this point that what was one more? They may have been of different castes, but his loyal soldiers had promised to watch over Pakpa's family household while he was away, an act of such unselfish kindness that it had left Jagdish humbled. Do you mind if I ask you something, Risalda? Me minding hasn't stopped you once yet. What? Jagdish muttered, but then Gutch was quiet. He looked over to see that the worker was studying him intently. There was a lot more intelligence behind those beady little eyes than the big man let on. What do you want to know? Why are you doing this? Jagdish assumed he wasn't talking about fixing supper. I have to. I've got nothing else. I noticed your wife see you off at the gates of the city. Hardy worker stock by the looks of her. Maybe we're distant cousins. But a beautiful girl, and it was plain as day how she feels about you. Can't hardly call that nothing. We both know Ashok wasn't the one who attacked Cole's Stream. I can't let that stand. And when you catch up to him, you're going to do what? Are you going to have him sign a testimony? I hereby swear I didn't murder everybody. Now, I'm no judge, but I figure they might be a little leery of taking him at his word. I'll think of something, Jagdish said. Do you think you can duel him and take his sword? My cell had a crack in the wall. I got to watch how your sparring sessions went. If you think that's going to happen, you're delusional. Damn it, Gutch. I don't care about the sword. I care about the truth. My name has been dishonoured. That's... Jagdish sighed. You're not a warrior. You wouldn't understand. I'm a different caste, not a different species. I know what it means to have a name. That hung there for a while, as Gutch continued studying him. Perhaps... Jagdish looked back down at the pocket watch. You've seen this device? Yes, impressive little thing. While your caste spends its time hacking each other to bits, my caste improves our lives through labour and miraculous invention. You're welcome. I should have left it home. If I don't come back, I want my son to have it. Then return it to him. Only after I prove who really killed my men and my charges. They may have been prisoners, but they deserved better, and their safety was my responsibility. I will avenge them. I will kill these wizards, then I'll return with my name and honour intact. A warrior is only worth his name. Gutch nodded thoughtfully. You actually believe all that stuff? Jagdish put the watch away. I have to.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, and that's it for the podcast, thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz, and a wistful tune on flute and oboe ringing in the pre-apocalypse, where cars stop turning to the right and bumblebees continually chase people who have had LASIK surgery, plus thanks, praise, and plaudits to DJ Butler, author of Witchy Kingdom. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.